Hello, John Robinson and Chris Shannon.
Hello, good afternoon.
All right, thanks for joining me today. Chris, we've had a couple of conversations already, and we brought John on board today. John and Chris are share a podcast, and I believe, John, you run it, right? The Talk to 'em. Okay.
Yeah, Talk to 'em podcast.
So Talk to 'em, which is talk and the number 2, then apostrophe EM. So if anybody wants to look up Talk to 'em, please look that up. It's a Facebook. You post all your videos on Facebook, right?
Yes.
Okay. So anybody like to follow that podcast? Please do. They're discussing, from what I've seen and listened to, mostly current racial issues, because I think that's at the top of everybody's mind. But maybe that's not necessarily the long-term goal, but that's what you've kind of started off as
Correct.
as a group talking about.
Yep.
So for my channel, my channel is RAP, which is an acronym for Regular Amazing People. And I've been just talking to people about their stories. We've talked to people with cancer. We've talked to people who are missionaries. We've talked to people about their spiritual journeys, just their story. And while these conversations with Chris, and now we're having a little more of a panel discussion, are more of a divergence from telling individual people's stories, I'm going to continue doing them and continue posting them on this channel. And the reason is that I believe that race is a part of the human story. I hesitate to even say a United States or American story, because historically, we see countries that are homogenous in race. When we think of China, we think of a person who is Chinese. America is this big experiment of taking people of every race, religion, political leaning, et cetera, and bringing it all into one big conglomeration. And we're at one of the breaking points of our experiment in today's culture. And I think it's really important to keep talking about that. I'd love to have somebody on these panels in the future, because like I mentioned, we will continue doing them. I'm not sure at what pace, but we'll do it again, who has an opposing viewpoint and is willing to have a rational discussion about it. So if you are that person, you'd like to come on to the panel and have a rational discussion, please hit me up on Facebook Messenger. My name is Dirk Pointer, and we'll set up for next time you can be on the panel. I really would like to welcome that voice. I'm going to try and do a little bit of that myself, because we try and keep an interesting discussion, but I have no interest in doing the fake, I support this, I'm against this conversation. I don't find that productive. So I'd like to have somebody that is dissenting and can have a calm and logical discussion about it onto our next panel discussions. So,
and if it helps at all, if I'm a part of those discussions, Dirk, I promise you I'm not going in with the purpose to dominate or to win an argument, but more so just to provide my perspective and to listen to the other persons, and hopefully we both walk away, or we all walk away with understanding from another person's point of view.
The same here. I share that with Chris as well. I think that just having a productive conversation and just really understanding the other point of view, we can all have a conversation about these topics and issues. And it's not about who's right or wrong. It's just about seeing the different point of views and just coming to some sort of understanding. So I'm the same way. I'm not here for argument or debate or trying to make somebody feel bad, but it's more of just to kind of hear that other perspective. So.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for saying that, because that's really important. And I think it might be important to a person out there that's thinking they want to come on, but doesn't want to subject themselves to what they might view as the Facebook mob or the social media mob, where they disagree with something and then just get destroyed for it. Because that's not where we're here to talk, right? And we've all got to live together. Chris and I work together, and we're all living in the same St. Louis metropolitan area. So let's get to it. So my first topic that I really want to talk about with you guys today is, lately we've seen this move, and it's not a new thing. It's something that's happened before, is to tear down these historical statues. And in the past, it's been a discussion, and people come down really hard on one side or the other. But I'd really like to talk about that. And I think it's important within this discussion. I think it involves talking about our entire history, right? Because that's what these statues represent, the ones we're talking about anyway. We're talking about statues of Confederate soldiers, generally speaking, are the ones that are most targeted. And I think really, that goes with the conversation with the flag, the Confederate flag as well. And but I also want to talk about, where does the line get drawn? You know, we have monuments to Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves, but also at the same time, in a historical perspective, perhaps said that he didn't believe that black men and white men were equal. He believed everyone should be free, but he made some pretty strong statements. Now, so where does that come in? And then we go back to Washington, who owned slaves, Jefferson, who owned slaves, but founded a country where we have freedoms and the ability to stand up and peacefully protest and say things. Those freedoms are built into the Constitution. So where do those lines get drawn, and where do they start? Where do they end? And how do we resolve these conversations?
So I would start by saying that that's a touchy subject, right? Because history is history, and I think that, you know, some people, when they're confronted with history and how it is, they don't like it. And what I mean by that is, you have these statues that, you know, as you said, Dirk, kind of point back to Confederacy, right? We know when you look at Confederacy, this is something that was back in the days of slavery, racism, you know, lynching, you know, just all of those horrible things. When people look at these statues of, you know, the fallen Confederate soldiers, and then people that represented, you know, just Confederacy overall, it brings them back to the days where things were at their complete worst, you know, where you were owned by somebody, where you didn't have any control over your life. Your slave master did. If your slave master wanted to, you know, do whatever he wanted to do with your kids or whatever went on back then, that person had control, you know. So when people see these statues, that's what it represents for them. I do understand where people come from, where they say, where do we draw the line? This is history. This is a great, not great time in the past, but this is something that happened in the past that represents something. That's why the statue was there. I get that completely. But I would say for myself, I think I'm on both sides of it. If we're going to tell history how it is, I'm fine. Leave the statue up. Just say, hey, this is what this person represented. They were part of, you know, the whole Confederacy, right? And that's what it was. But if you're going to do that, don't teach history from one point of view and just make it slated to one, you know, one group of people. Tell the complete history. I was telling Chris this before we got on. When we talk about statues, there's political activists that were a big part of American history, and we don't have statues of them. Matter of fact, I told Chris that whenever we went and put whenever the Martin Luther King statue got put up, there was outrage over that, just putting the statue up, right? We're not talking about taking it down. We're talking about putting that thing up, right? And that's just one statue of many that should be put up. So, and I'll kind of give it over to Chris in a minute because I keep going, but you know, when we talk about statues, if we're going to do it, you know, just make sure it's true to everyone, and that you're putting up all figures that had a piece in history over the course of the years. And some of the people that have been historic in American history that we could talk about is like Huey P. Newton, right? Political activist. Malcolm X, he was a human rights activist. Louis Farrakhan, minister and political activist. Nat Turner, he led the slave rebellion, you know, against slave masters. These are people in history that people might look at them as horrible or bad, but there's no statues of them anywhere, right? So just imagine if we had those statues up, you know, how would the opposing side feel, you know, in this same course of action of what we're talking about now? So again, I'll kind of end my piece a little bit and let others kind of chime in, but I think I'm on both sides. I could see where people say it's part of history, don't take it down, but I could also see where people are like, hey, you know what, this is part of a bad part of history, take it down. But again, if we're gonna talk about history, let's talk about all history, right? And let's put up some other statues that represent, you know, the time of the past.
And speaking of our conversation, Jonathan and I were somewhat at opposing views. He was like, yeah, leave them up, but then put statues of other people like Martin Luther King, who, by the way, like you said, there was some outrage. And this is a guy who won the Nobel Peace Prize, and a lot of people highly regard to him. And there was outrage for that. I say, though, I'm on the side of, yeah, let's remove them. I'm not saying like completely destroy the statues, because I can understand, if I felt like it was part of my heritage, that I would feel like someone's trying to steal that from me. But we also have to realize that those statues are basically of guys who took up arms against the United States. So, I mean, technically they were traitors. I mean, so if anybody were to speak right now against anything of America, they would be considered a traitor. And that's exactly what happened. And I'm not saying to remove them. I'm saying to remove the monuments, but not to destroy them. And that is not to erase the history, but rather to alter the perception, or to call to attention of the previous interpretation of history, kind of what Jonathan was just saying, because we're glorifying these guys. And I would be the first to admit, like Robert E. Lee, based on what I've learned in history, was an awesome tactician. And from a warrior standpoint, yeah, we want to give him high regards because he was awesome in that manner. However, that doesn't take away from the fact that one, he was fighting against the United States Army, and then two, he was fighting with those that wanted to continue perpetuating slavery. So I say, as far as it being on public grounds, then no, I'm totally against that. I would say maybe in a museum. But if you go to Germany, there's no statues of Hitler or any of his generals, right? I mean,
yeah,
yeah,
that's a really fair point. And you mentioned that this was an insurrection, right? If we talk about the Confederacy, I mean, and I've seen at least one post where it said, well, these are, American heroes died on both sides. And I was like, well, actually, no, Confederacy heroes died on one side and United States heroes died on the other side, so it really is challenging. But at the same time, that's somebody's great grandfather that is now a United States citizen. Where does that balance come in? So let me ask this then.
That's what I was thinking. Oh, sorry.
No, go.
Well, that's why I was thinking, have a museum, and, within the museum, you can have those monuments and statues, and you can share the history of them. Yes, he led the Confederacy or whatever, and this is what they believed or whatever. I'm okay with that. But as far as it being on government property, I think it just, it sends a different signal or a different sign. It says something totally different to me, that the government is saying, oh, it's okay to have this, even though these guys took up arms against the United States. And by the way, they were pro-slavery.
Right. So there's the question then is, and this gets a little bit political, but so how should that be handled? If you have statues on federal property, the federal government could take those down. But then should the federal government be passing laws about statues that are on state or local property as well? Or do you leave that to the local municipalities to make their own decisions based on their populations? Or, I don't want to get too deeply political, but that's actually kind of part of the same discussion, because instead of the way that it happens where a mob of people show up and throw a rope around it and tear it down, that seems to be kind of, while it may deserve to come down, from my point of view, that seems to be counterproductive, because you're actually making a more of a aggressive, violent statement against it in today's world. So where's the lot? Where does that happen?
I would think. Oh, go ahead, Jonathan.
No, I was going to say, I think from my point of view, maybe if you're going to take action against the statues and you're going to put some kind of rule in place to limit and or keep certain statues from being built within the United States, it probably needs to be handled like on a state and federal type of level. So I think that's a big ordeal. That's a touchy subject, and it's pretty rough in terms of how to handle that. But it all depends. But I want to add this. I think that right now we're so deep in history. We have all these statues and monuments around the country. And again, they're part of history, whether right or wrong, right? We know about these individuals, and we've done our homework, and we know whether they were good or bad or what their views were. I think what it's really about is rewriting history. And I'll keep pointing back to this because I kind of spoke about it earlier, where you don't necessarily tear it down or put it. I disagree with Chris with the whole. I agree and disagree with Chris about putting it in a museum and tearing it down, whatever the case may be. I mean, leave it up. Rewrite history and include some more elements of history that will satisfy all sides. Again, there's other figures that are part of American history that I've pointed out on this podcast that people might think they were horrible people, but other people might think they were great at what they did during that time because of the situation. So instead of like ripping everything down and tearing it apart, maybe rewrite it and include the missing pieces that will kind of satisfy everyone, within the American culture.
So I mean, and it does seem like we probably will start seeing more statues of African American heroes and other American heroes. I would hope soon. I honestly, as a person, I don't feel like I go around looking at a lot of statues. So, there's a statue of St. Louis downtown. That was the next part of my question. I know it's there. I've seen it, but I don't, like it doesn't impact my values or who I am, like at all. Right. It just kind of, I know that it represents the guy that the city's named after. So we have a group, apparently a somewhat sizable group, that wants that statue torn down and the name of the city to be changed from St. Louis, I guess, based on his past.
Yeah.
What about that, Chris?
Well, here's the thing. I was thinking too, when Jonathan was just talking about how some people had taken up arms to tear down the statues, regular civilians, right? I think if nothing else, to preserve that part of history, that's why I stand on my perspective of putting it in a museum, because then we can better protect it, better preserve it, and that way we would diminish. We won't completely get rid of the controversy, but we would somewhat diminish it, because now you don't have people sneaking around at night trying to tear it down, and then a counter protest coming along, and now we have this big brawl in the street. As far as I know what you're getting at, Dirk, as far as the one downtown St. Louis and maybe renaming. I think there is a line. Where that line is, I'm not sure, because you're right. We can't go back and just rewrite everything. But I think anything, especially like the Confederacy, to me, that's clear cut and dry to me. There's some others like somebody spoke about Mount Rushmore and well, our founding fathers had slaves, right? That to me, that's a little gray area, right? And I think right now we're living in the gray. The same thing with the St. Louis statue you were just talking about. I think that would take a little bit more thought than the statues for the Confederacy. There's some laws right now to prohibit the removal of them, of some of the statues. I think if we have the right people in place that really, looked at it and studied and saw the pros and the cons of removing it or putting it in a safe space, I would be okay with that, right? Versus just, either one side saying it should come down and the other side saying, no, let it remain. I think as a people, because right now what we're going through is a rebranding. I did this training called personal branding. And I think that's what's going on right now with America, is that we decided, we want to change our brand. And there's people in the street on both sides. However, I think at the end of this, we will realize what it is, that the message that we want to send. And I think right now the message that we want to send is that racism and bigotry and all that stuff is no longer tolerated, and anything that's tied to it, some people, whether you're radical on one side or the other, but some people are saying, you know what, let's find a way to fix this.
And so I would say too, when we talk about the statues being removed, I want to point out the fact that, and I can't think of it right now, I saw the article and it doesn't come to my mind right now, but there's a state right now that's there's a big debate going around about a statue being removed, and the state is threatening to cut funding off because of the removal of the statue. So people they're going back and forth, and I can't recall what it is. You guys might research it when we get off of here. But this particular state, whoever the I can't think of her name, his or her name, but they're threatening to cut the funding off because of this whole issue of removing statues. But I want to point everybody to this. So in South Carolina right now, they're in the process of moving, or they might have already moved, the John C. Calhoun statue. He's a former vice president and supporter of slavery. So again, this is a guy linked back to, Confederacy. Frankfort, Kentucky, there's a Confederate President Jefferson Davis. Okay, and then Jacksonville, Florida, there's a statue of fallen Confederate soldiers that they're in the process of removing. So when you kind of look at people's point of view of wanting to take this down, I think people are enraged. This whole issue that happened with the whole George Floyd situation, it sparked this, where people are like, we're tired. There's racial and injustice in America, and this is a problem. And if these things continue to be visible and be a part of our daily lives, these statues, then it's not really changing anything, because we've done so much. We've said so much, and we've tried to march and protest to the point where nothing has changed. So something has got to change. You know what? From the people's standpoint, let's take these statues down that represent Confederacy, slavery, bigotry, racism. Let's get rid of them. Let's rewrite history. Let's go that route. So again, I don't want to contradict what I'm saying. I understand why people are upset and want these statues removed completely. I get it, right? But I think, to your point, Dirk, it's like, where do you draw the line? I mean, most of these statues are linked back to people who owned slaves, had slaves, were probably enemies of the state. I mean, you name it, they're there. Do we just rip them all down and just rebuild some other ones, or what do we do? So it's a thin line, and it's a touchy subject. But again, I see the point of view of people wanting to remove them, and I also see the point of view of people saying, hey, keep them where they're at, and maybe add to history, add other figures that were a part of American history to kind of even the playing field.
But here's the thing, though, the vast majority of those, especially like the Confederate statues, were built during like the Jim Crow era. So we want to continue glorifying and, white supremacy, because if you look at it, white nationalists and neo-Nazis, they pretty much claim some of these symbols, some of these statues as their heritage. So therefore, they've essentially co-opted those images into their own psyche, right? So it's like, now it's going to be hard to discern between whether or not you're part of the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists and white supremacy, or if you're just saying that this is just part of my heritage, right? So they've pretty much hijacked it, similar to what we were talking about a few weeks back with the whole riots and everything. The protest is there to say, hey, we want change, but then there's elements that hijack that message. So for those that are saying that these statues and these symbols are a part of their heritage, well, I'm sorry, but they've been hijacked by those that perpetuate and say that, the white race is superior, or, your neo-Nazis and white nationalists.
Yeah, the same people that we saw doing a lot of the damage during the protests and riots were those far extreme right neo-Nazi groups were out there trying to start a war, basically.
Yeah.
So, are you on your second Capri Sun, John?
I'm on my second one. I'm gonna keep going. Hey, don't monitor my drinking habits, man. I got water too. I came ready. Like, I don't know if you guys have this set up, but I got mine all together. So
we're good to go. That's fine. So yeah, and you mentioned Chris. You mentioned the Mount Rushmore, and that's a gray area. I got to be honest. For me, that's a pretty cut and dry. For me, Washington, Lincoln, Jefferson are
our founding fathers.
They're the founding fathers. Yes, two of them owned slaves. Lincoln never owned slaves, but clearly, and in the historical context of things, we look back we study people like Julius Caesar, or we study Mongol guy. Oh my gosh, Genghis Khan, who wiped out maybe 5 to 10% of the Earth's population And now we look at him and say, wow, he had some really good tactics and brought in some new ideas of government, you know, and clearly
Good point.
yeah, we're not 1,000 years removed, you know, it's a different situation. But in the historical context, people might look at this conversation 200 years from now and say that we were backwards and had no idea what we're talking about for whatever develops along that path. I don't know. And what I do know is that men like Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, John Adams, you know, that whole founding crew, none of them are perfect. They're human beings. They lived in the times they lived in. They set up a constitution and a way of living for us that allows us to have conversations like this without a concern. You know, I hear a lot of people talking about fascism. We're living in a fascist society. Well, no, we're not. Because we can say it out loud. If you say out loud you're living in a fascist society, then you're not living in a fascist society.
No, because in a fascist society, anything that you say can probably get you killed or jailed. So.
Exactly. And you might think the guy running the country is a buffoon, and that's always your decision. You know, everyone's free to think that one way or another. Anyway, so I hear that it's gray, but for me, and I agree with the Confederacy. I agree that was for me, all that needs to be in a museum. Like Indiana Jones said, it belongs in the museum. And because those aren't United States of America heroes. And I hesitate to say America, and America as a whole, North and South American continent, but United States heroes. They're Confederacy heroes. And you know, while that has a place in our history, and those are from the states that are now the United States and were before, I do think that's somebody mentioned, I think I saw a thing that the Confederacy lasted was a shorter time period than New Coke, you know. It's anyway, I agree with you, Chris, on that. And I also agree with John. It's like, you know, we can't forget that history. We don't want to leave it and say it didn't happen either, right? Because then if you forget it, you'll repeat it in some way or another.
Exactly. Yep. And that's why I'm that's why I'm against completely removing it, you know, regardless of what they represented. I think, to your point, we would definitely want it, you know, somewhere in a museum, somewhere in our history to talk about it, to discuss it, but to also not glorify it, especially if you have a certain group of people who perpetuate hate that are, you know, that are tying themselves to this particular symbol or to this particular era in United States history.
Okay. I want to move on to Minneapolis here, defunding the police, but first, I want to ask you guys this, and I actually didn't tell you I was going to ask this, so I'm making a little adjustment here. But so, Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter. I see them both published, and I have my own opinions on both sides of it. I think Chris and I have talked about it a little bit, but I'll let you. But John, what are your thoughts on those two phrases, standing beside each other and/or juxtaposing each other?
So I would say this. I would say that those saying all lives matter, when they say that, they have to understand that they're belittling the issues that the Black community deals with by saying that. So right now you hear a lot of Black Lives Matter. And the reason people are saying that, you know, for the most part, Black people, is because of all the injustices, the racism, the bigotry, and all the different issues that we deal with on a regular that other people don't deal with, right? The all lives matter portion, the people that are saying that are people who are blind to these issues, I would say. You know, they don't deal with them on a regular. It's out of sight, out of mind. So they don't even really think it happens, or they don't even think that it's that big of a problem. And that's when they come in with the all lives matter. So here's the thing. All lives do matter. Okay? Every life matters. But the reason people say Black Lives Matter is because at an alarming rate, things are happening to Black people, right? A lot of injustice is being done to Black people. The police brutality of Black people is at an all-time high, which is why people are screaming Black Lives Matter. So when we say that, it's like, hey, we're part of this big all lives matter, but guess what? It doesn't seem like we're included in that because we're kind of left out. All these things are happening to us. So we want to remind you guys, Black Lives Matter too. Like, we're human beings too. We're afforded the same rights and privileges as everyone else. Our lives matter. You know, Black Lives Matter, right? So that's why that's being said. So I would say the two shouldn't be used in combination, really. And whenever someone yells Lives Matter, and you have someone else that comes back and say, no, 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 it's all lives matter, that is a person that has not taken the time, number one, to do their research on the issues that are happening in this country to Black people. They're blind to the issues that are happening to Black people, and either they know it and don't really care. So they just throw out that terminology, hey, all lives matter. I'll share with you guys a story that fits with this. So very good person. Guy has a great heart, but I go to a Christian church. It's predominantly white people, right? Caucasian, right? I don't see any problem with that. I go there to learn about God and to contribute and do my, fulfill my role in society. So I'm not really looking at color or anything like that. We're serving one God. But anyway, I was at service one Sunday, and towards the end of the service, a white gentleman gets up in front of the whole congregation. He starts talking about some topics that we discussed in the service, and then he ends with this. He says, "Hey, I just want to let everyone know that there's been a lot of, political things going on, but I want to keep us all abreast that all lives matter." He said this to the entire church, and I was in fumes. Okay, I was in fumes because I was like, he clearly doesn't understand the issues that we deal with on a regular. And I know the guy. This guy, I'm not sure that he has that many. I'm not sure he has a diverse set of friends. I'm not sure he grew up with a diverse set of friends. He's only been accustomed to what he's been accustomed to. So he's not really understanding of some of the issues that go on. And from a biblical perspective, he's like, hey, all the lives matter. But I was so upset. I reached out to the preacher and I told him about this incident. And I said, hey, look here. People that are saying this, I really feel that they need to do their homework and research on things that are going on. And after that, I challenged them to rethink what they're saying, because it's yes, every life matters, but when you have a group of people that are being excluded from everything and they're being impacted more than any other group, that's why this whole narrative of Black Lives Matter is being shouted out, because there has to be some sort of change. The whole system from the beginning has been set up to make sure that we're always at the bottom of the barrel.
And
so that's my take on it.
And I think you said the key word there, Jonathan, at the beginning, where you said Black Lives Matter too. That's the whole phrase behind it. And so sometimes it does feel, I don't know, and it's hard to discern whether or not the person that says all life matters, if they're saying that because they don't understand that we're saying Black Lives Matter too, or if they are perceiving it as saying that only Black Lives Matter. But the case is that we're just saying that Black Lives Matter too. We should be able to have some of the same considerations, the same compassion that we see for other groups. And since you brought up the whole Christian aspect, I've had this conversation with a few people that asked about that. And I referred them to the book of Luke 15:4, where Jesus talked about, the parable where he left the 99 sheep to go save the one. And hopefully this will help somebody else understand where we're coming from with this. So did Jesus just not care about the 99? No, he still cared about them, but they weren't the ones that were in danger at the time. It was the one sheep, which is why he went after that one to go get that sheep and then bring it back so it can be a part of the whole fold. The other sheep weren't in danger at the time. So that's my answer to that, Dirk, is that, and some people just may not, like I said, may not understand, but some people are saying it out of spite or out of the whole thought that, oh, you're saying that only Black Lives Matter. And I think what we all need to do because of this tender time is just take the time to listen and understand. And if we don't understand what the person is saying or the intent behind what they're saying, then ask more questions so that we can have a conversation like this where we walk away understanding each other.
I would give you something positive and say this. If you look at the past years ago, when Black Lives Matter kind of started becoming a thing, I think most people painted it in a bad light. It wasn't really getting that much traction from everybody, and some people almost consider Black Lives Matter like a hate group or something. You know what I'm saying? Even though nothing bad was going on, we're just protesting, marching, and trying to voice our concerns, right? But today, I think there's been more traction. I've seen a diverse set of people really gravitating to this whole Black Lives Matter. You see white people, black people, Mexican, you name it. They got
It's
Black
around the
Lives
world.
Matter t-shirts on. They got Black Lives Matter hats on. These people are joined, you know, arm in arm, hand in hand, because they're finally woke, and they're like, you know what? There is a problem. I hate to say this, rest in peace to George Floyd, right? But because of that, it woke a lot of people up that were asleep prior, right? You see people now joining the cause, and they're like, you know what? We understand now. Black lives do matter. We're sorry. Black lives matter too. So that's kind of my take on it.
Yeah, speaking for myself, because the phrase first came up from Ferguson with, I can't remember the kid's name.
Michael Brown.
Michael Brown, yeah. That's the first time I heard Black Lives Matter was in the aftermath of Ferguson. And I'm going to be straight. If I'm looking at myself back then with Michael Brown, when I saw the footage of him, 10 minutes before that or whatever, beating up a guy in a convenience store to steal a pack of cigars or whatever it was. And then, there's no video of the incident. There's no direct video of it. And there's a lot of evidence both ways, whatever. So it wasn't conclusive to me. And then at that time, I was certainly not willing to invest in Black Lives Matter because to me, it upset some people, but I felt like that person, Michael Brown, had put himself in a position where you've committed a crime and it seems like there was a resistance of arrest at that point. That's a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
We can have that discussion on the side. The video of George Floyd, as me, I am your typical middle America, suburban, middle class white guy.
Yep.
I've grown up with a respect of law enforcement, and I think I told Chris before, it was ingrained in me as a child. If you resist arrest, you're putting your life in danger, and so that's how I've always looked at it. You resist arrest, you put your life in danger. The police are there to help us, and I've never had any opposite feeling. I've never had an encounter with a police officer that made me feel differently. Yeah, there was a guy sitting in a speed trap during construction, a little dicey and, whatever. Come on. But I've never had that feeling like someone's following me for no good reason, right?
Yep.
And I mentioned to Chris before that my not exactly my stepdad, but my mom's longtime partner is an African-American, and she's had that happen to her when he's been driving in the car since they've been together.
Yep.
And that was my first realization, to have somebody basically in my family that has had that experience. Well, not basically, my mother was but Willie, who I'm talking about, is my stepdad. I just call him that now. But to watch the life leave George Floyd's body for no reason, and as we hear even more about it, he paid this check cashing place with a counterfeit $20 bill.
Yep.
Any one of us could do that on any. I could use a counterfeit 20. I have no idea.
I've used the fake. Don't condemn me, but I've used fake checks and stuff before.
Yeah, and I'm sure we've all done that, right? We have no idea.
And sometimes unknowingly. So.
Yeah.
But it shouldn't be a death sentence.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And so we can lead into that. So for me, the idea of Black Lives Matter and the idea of seeing that it is different has come since the time of Ferguson and Michael Brown, as I've experienced it in my family, and I've seen the George Floyd video. It changed me. It changed who I am, and it changed what I think about it, honestly. And I think that's true for a really high percentage of white Americans. I really do. And
it's not just America either, Dirk. I didn't mean to cut you off, but if you look, it's around the world. I mean, you have people in like Syria, New Zealand, Italy, Africa, in places that I would have never known, and I'm seeing them, having murals of George Floyd. And please know that the incident, it's not just about George Floyd. It's about the continuation of the, the things that are happening to Black Americans. But to me, it's a wonderful thing. It's something that I didn't think I'd see in my lifetime, but it sounds like that everyone, like Jonathan said, is waking up to the fact that there is still remnants of the systematic racism that was perpetuated years ago, through the Black codes and then the Jim Crow laws, and then through, things that continue to, because the Jim Crow laws was just 40 years ago?
Right.
I mean, a little over 40 years ago. So we are still in the baby phases. If you look at it from a drug standpoint, if somebody was on opioids for a long time, it takes a while for it to leave their system, right? So we had this drug called racism in the blood veins of America. And yeah, we sort of stopped using it, but it's still in our blood. So now it's time for us to finally stand up and say enough is enough. And this whole Black Lives Matter movement, hopefully everybody, takes heed to it and not necessarily let the noise and those that are trying to hijack the message, because the message at its core is that it's really only one race, and that's the human race. And it's time to start treating everyone just like that.
So I would share with you guys a few stories that tie into this as well. Just for me specifically, I have no criminal record. And I think all of us are kind of in that same category, because if we did have any kind of record, we wouldn't be working for a financial company. So I have nothing, right? But in my lifetime, it's ongoing. I would say that I'm blessed now because it doesn't happen a lot. But in my history, I've always been targeted by police. Being a young Black man, I've been stereotyped. I've been racially profiled. I have a few examples. I was at home asleep one day. Cops knocked on my door. They mistake me for someone else. They were coming because they had a warrant, supposedly had a warrant for someone else. I opened the door. Cop has a 9mm gun pointed at my head. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I could have died that day just freaking out from the gun being pointed at my head. But thank God I stayed calm, and I kind of was talking to the officers peacefully, and I didn't do anything that would cause him to shoot me. But I just thought it was kind of absurd. You show up to my front doors with a 9mm looking for someone else that wasn't me. I've been pulled over before, not speeding, not doing anything, just a Black guy in a car. I had my license plate light was out. I got pulled over for that. I've gotten racially profiled at Lake St. Louis Walmart, where I was working there. I came out of I was taking a break. I came out with my hoodie on, I fit the stereotypical description of a guy with a hoodie on, Black guy, up to no good, about to rob a bank or something, right? That people have this in their minds. I came out, and during my break, I always go to my car and I lay down, go to sleep, and then for an hour, and then I go back in there and I start stocking the shelves again. This is when I was a kid. Cop saw me come out the store with my hoodie on, immediately racially profiled me. Next thing you know, maybe 10 minutes within me sleeping in my car, knocks on my window, and I'm kind of shocked and confused, like, what's going on? Are you guys looking for somebody, or got me confused with somebody else? I roll the window down. Cop tells me that he tells me to give my ID to him so he can check it. Long story short, they ended up arresting me, taking me down to the station, all to find out that they had the wrong person. Like, what's going on, man? I work at Walmart. I'm sitting here telling the guy, like, hey, here's my badge, here's my vest. I had the little Walmart vest with the logo and everything. I work at Walmart. Go talk to my supervisor. I'm just in my car asleep. What issue do you have with me? I haven't drove my car anywhere. I'm not speeding. I'm just minding my business. What's the problem? And I point that out because I'm not the only one who deals with that. That's just, to me, that's not even nipping the surface. That's like little, compared to people that deal with the cops on a more extreme basis, right? So magnify what I just told you by 10, 20, 30 times. And that's what other people in these in the city, in these low income, kind of ghettos, if you will, are dealing with. Police just do what they want, and it's a bad situation. I do want to put this out there because I don't want to seem like I'm this guy who hates police. There are police that are good and they do their jobs and they don't abuse their power. But there's also that side that they abuse it to their authority. They are crooked and they're criminals with their badge. And that's for everybody. And something that Chris pointed out that I would end you with here is that we have to look at everyone in a human aspect and stop looking at the uniform they wear, the badge they wear, the color they are, and things like that. Every single person on earth has the ability to do good. Every single person on earth has the ability to do bad. If we start looking at people from the aspect of being able to do good or bad, then I think we could clear up a lot of these issues. People immediately look at police and say, oh, you know what, that's an officer of the law. They can do no wrong. That the guy that they killed or whatever, he must have did something wrong, and that's why they had to take that action and kill him and end his life, because he just was totally out of line, right? I think we need to get away from that mind frame. I would want to think that the cop is doing their justified duty, but we have to understand police officers are human beings in uniform who can do good or bad with the power that's given to them. And I will kind of keep it at that.
So all of this leads me to Minneapolis. And so, and I might get small details of this a little bit off, but so basically the city council of Minneapolis has voted to defund the police, meaning that they've removed from their city ordinances that the part that's, they voted 12-0 on this. They removed the part of the ordinance that says the city will maintain a police force with taxpayer dollars. They haven't gone further than that yet, but the stated goal being to establish I don't remember what it's called, but oh, we lost Chris.
I think he's going to come back on.
Okay, there he is. Okay. So right. You got to touch your screen every now. So the stated goal being to establish like a community safety force or something like that, where you still have a police force, but they deal with actual criminal situations. And then you have like, I don't know what you would call it, like a de-escalation force that would deal with, for example, the guy in was it Georgia at the Wendy's drive-in that was drunk, and now he's dead. Yeah. So like in that situation, the police show up. He clearly should not have driven there. He clearly is intoxicated, or he's not in his right state of mind, right? So he's done something. He clearly shouldn't have driven there. They need to move the car. I believe he asked for them to call him an Uber a couple of times.
He even said he can just walk to his sister's house or whatever.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah.
Then they go to arrest him because he clearly had at some point, most likely been drunk driving or was disorderly, whatever, in public. He resists then, and then it goes as bad as it can possibly go. Should a police officer even be there to address that kind of situation, right? Or should that be some kind of de-escalation or community officer that's unarmed and is there to help the situation, find some help for the individual? Clearly, if he had smashed into a family of four and killed somebody on the way there, it's a different situation. But
I think they also found him sleeping. So that tells me we don't even know the beginning of the story. What if someone dropped him off at the Wendy's because his car was parked there? And I'm not making excuses, but the point was that we really didn't know whether he was driving or not. He was sitting there sleeping when the police came up to find him or whatever. But I like the idea, though, of Minneapolis. With them, the proposal of I think it's like the Department of Community Safety and Violence Prevention or something like that. And I believe they'll have a branch that's, law enforcement. Just like I talked about the rebranding of America, I think there is a need for rebranding of the police force. And I'm sorry if I kind of jumped the gun, but I believe you were going to ask us, do we believe in defunding the police? And I think first we have to look at that word and talk about what it really means. Does it mean to completely abolish the police departments? Heck no. We don't want anarchy, right? But should we go in and ensure that our police departments have some measures, some controls in place to ensure that those that we have entrusted to protect and serve, to ensure that they are indeed doing that, protecting and serving all lives, and not just a certain group, and not looking at a certain group as criminals, because all police aren't racist, all whites aren't racist, but all blacks aren't criminals either, right? So I believe that if we institute some type of implicit bias training, make sure that the police are really getting to know their communities. I don't know which podcast I was on, but I mentioned how, you know, when you go to a little small town and there's a sheriff and maybe 3 or 4 deputies, but they know everybody in their town. So therefore they show a little bit of compassion. And when there's an issue, they actually go to de-escalate it. And they're not always aiming to shoot or to kill or whatever, because they know little Johnny. They watch little Johnny grow up. In fact, they maybe even watch little Johnny's father grow up. So when little Johnny gets in trouble, they either just put him in jail, let him sleep it off, or, you know what I'm saying? There's just another level of the not personality, but there's just another level of with them being familiar with them and knowing that person that we don't see right now with some of the incidents that we're seeing in America.
Like Otis on the Andy Griffith Show, right? They just put him in jail every night because he's drunk, and he
exactly.
Yeah, he gets drunk the next night, goes back in jail.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that, you know, and not saying that we should allow people to continue being criminals, but if I'm here to protect and serve and the tax dollars are paying for it, then I need to make sure that I'm, 1, living up to what that badge means, and 2, remembering that there's a human that I'm dealing with right here. Now, if it's some big drug gang that come along and they got NR-15s or whatever, then yeah, maybe I need to pull in the military or something to deal with that. But just a regular guy sleeping in his car, or a guy who may or may not knowingly knew that he had a counterfeit $20 bill, there's no reason for these guys to die. And that's just not the only ones. It happened, and I know some people will argue and say, "Oh, it doesn't just happen to blacks," but it happens to black disproportionately. I've mentioned, you know, Daniel Shaver, a young white individual who was killed by police or whatever. So that just gives even more light and even more fuel to the fact that we do need to reconstruct our police forces around America.
So I want to say this. So with defunding, something that Chris mentioned, and just understanding what that means. So defunding, you have defunding police and disbanding police. So defunding is just kind of limiting the funds that go to the police department. And I want to kind of spend a little bit of time on that. When you look at it, the taxpayer dollars pay for the police to even do their job, to be in place to do their job and protect and serve, as they would say. Some people have an issue with the funds that go to the police, because you'll hear this time and time again, where people will yell like, "Hey, we're paying you our tax dollars, but you're out here killing our kids." Like, we're not paying you to kill us. We're paying you to protect us and de-escalate situations. The problem with some police officers is there is no direct de-escalation. It goes straight to the elimination and killing someone aspect in a lot of these cases. Now, the reason people are wanting to defund is to take some of those funds that would be going into the police that we've been paying them for a long time to do a pretty straightforward job, that is to protect, serve, de-escalate situations. If it gets to the point of, you know, lethal force where they're being shot at or whatever the case may be, then okay, right? But we want to remove those funds and put them into the inner cities where there's a lack of education, there's a lack of housing, there's a lack of just funding overall in these inner cities, where people they're not given the proper tools to succeed. They're in the ghettos, they're in the bottom of the bottom, and they're fighting for scraps and doing anything they can. We all know that the things that I just mentioned, you know, low income housing, you know, poor education system, lack of jobs and things like that in these inner cities is a direct correlation to increased crime rate, right? So the thing is, taking some of the money that we would, you know, the tax dollars that we would pay the police, and kind of focusing on improving the educational system, improving jobs in these inner cities, fixing the housing in these inner cities. Have you seen some of the have you been to the city and just drove down in some of these different areas and looked at the housing? I mean, the roofs look like they're almost about to cave in. I mean, the streets look bad. They got potholes everywhere. And I don't want to go, you know, and rant on about how the city looks, but it's in some parts, it's horrible. You know what I'm saying? So you know, that's a direct correlation to, you know, crime. But that's why people want to refocus money. They want to take money from going to the police and just limit their resources, so we're not paying them all this money to do some of the things that have been done, and refocusing that money on improving those communities. And in turn, as we improve the communities, crime rate will go down, police's jobs will be that much, I don't want to say easier, but it'd be that much better, because they won't have to deal with so much of a high crime rate. And the other term that I want to bring to light to people is disband. So you got defund, right? And you got disband. People are in the outrage. It's like, oh, defund police and get rid of them. Defund, to Chris's point, is not getting rid of them, right? Disband, that's another term where it says to remove the police from that particular community. That's what we don't want. I'm not a fan of removing police, because then we'll have an all-out. It'll be crazy. It'll be wild, wild west. Everybody walking around with guns. You protect yourself. That's a whole nother issue. But defund versus disband, they're two different terms, guys.
Hey, what's that?
Another thing I want to point out. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Dirk.
Nope, you go.
No, the other thing I want to point out, though, that's just one side of it, Jonathan, where you were talking about the inner cities and the ghettos and all that. One of the other reasons why there's such an outrage as far as the Black community goes is it's not just in the ghettos. You have people like Breonna Taylor, Nicholas Haywood. They weren't in the ghetto. They weren't bad citizens that were killed by the police. And
yep.
What was one of the most recent ones? Tatiana, whatever her last name was, I think it was Jefferson or whatever. These are people that weren't in the ghetto. It was just because of their dark skin. So that's why,
yep.
Again, I will say it again. I think there's a need to not necessarily defund, as in take away all of their funds or to abolish them, but to give them some of the tactical training to be able to deal with people and to get them more familiar with the Black community that they serve and they're supposed to protect. Because here's the thing, if you look at some of the history of the police, I mentioned this in another podcast, you know, the Black codes, basically back right after the abolition of slavery or whatever, there was this thing called the Black codes, and the police officers were paid to go out and arrest Blacks. It could have just been because we weren't supposed to be in a group gathering. So yes, we got arrested, because then that way we would be arrested, we would be in jail, and then therefore we can be used for cheap labor.
Yeah.
Right? And this isn't, we're not talking hundreds of years ago. This was still going on all the way up until like the early 1900s, right? And the mid 1900s, you know, around the Jim Crow era as well. So just as recent as 1985, there was a bombing in Philadelphia on U.S. soil against U.S. citizens. Yeah, that they killed the criminals they were after? Yeah, but they also killed innocent women and children that were in this Black community. So I say all that to say that defunding means to demilitarize our police. Yeah, if they have like somebody that has heavy artillery, then yeah, call in, you know, Coast Guard or whoever you need to. But this type of response to things, they're escalating and using excessive force. That's what we're really standing against, saying that this type of stuff needs to stop, regardless who it is. But because I'm part of the Black community, I'm saying I'm definitely standing against that, right?
And Dirk, something that I want to share with you is that I know of 3 instances, you know, in the past where police have killed either autistic individuals or people with disabilities. That has been a thing. And Chris brought up a good point where, you know, within the police, maybe certain situations we shouldn't call the police. There should be some community police that responds to these issues to de-escalate a situation and handle these types of ordeals. Chris, you just posted, I think his name was Elijah something. I think he was an autistic kid, and the police went to kind of deal with him, and he didn't know how to react with the police coming and asking him questions and containing him. I think it caused him to lose his life. The reason
Elijah McClain.
The reason I bring that up is because I have an autistic daughter, And I can tell you right now, if my daughter was walking home from school and the police, 2 cops approached her, she's not going to act accordingly. You know, some of us normal people, we might stop and have a conversation and say, hey, you know, how can I help you, officer? What did I do? Here's my ID, whatever. My daughter, because she's socially challenged, might take off running. And so I fear, as a Black father of my daughter, she's going to get shot because the police are going to say, oh, she was resisting, and we feared because she took off running. We don't know what she was going to do. So cops who don't have autistic children or children with disabilities will struggle to handle those kind of situations, and it can turn out deadly if they don't understand an autistic child or a person with disabilities. It becomes a use of deadly force for some of these cases. And I know of 3. Chris just posted one of them.
Yeah, I from my perspective, I look at Minnesota as the entire idea of it, I guess, is going to be up for vote to the community, to Minneapolis in November. So the voters will actually get to decide that they want to defund the police and start this new community policing organization, whatever it's going to be called. I'm really curious to watch them experiment with it. And I say that because that's kind of what makes, from my point of view, kind of makes our country great, is we can experiment with something in Minneapolis, and if it works, we can apply it in St. Louis and in Chicago and in New York, and we can apply it a little bit differently for each of those communities to make it work. It's the same thing we've seen, with marijuana. You know, we saw Colorado was the first state that opened it up and said, you know, we're not going to make this illegal anymore. And really didn't see a negative impact from that. And as a result, other states now are continuing to do the same thing. We can have that. That's a separate discussion, I realize. I'm just pointing out that I'm very curious to see. I think there's probably a pretty good chance Minneapolis voters pass this thing, right? I guess we'll find out in a couple months. And then they start over with their police force. If it works there and they have some kind of escalation levels, you got the criminal police, and you've got the escalation police, and you've got the counseling police, and you got the counselors, and you know, whatever it is. And so when you have the guy sitting in his car falling asleep at Wendy's in the drive-thru, nobody shows up with a weapon or handcuffs. You get the community servants out there to help him, you know. Or if that's the 4th time it's happened at this Wendy's with the same guy, then the police can, you know, something like that. It'll be really difficult to figure out where those lines are drawn again, because it's going to, like you mentioned, it's just going to be gray lines, right? Especially as we get used to it. But I'll be really curious to see Minneapolis experiment with that. And I think probably we're going to see other communities experiment with as well. And it sounds like there was one, and I can't remember the name, where they did that a few years ago, and it's been a success for them. So I'm really anxious to see that and see if we can start applying it in multiple places and make it a model instead of the exception to the rule.
That would be beautiful. Man, that would be an awesome thing if we see that develop in other cities, and see, I would love to see that be successful, because what that would mean to me is that, to your point, that now we actually have a community servants, so to speak, that are actually there to de-escalate the issues. If there's 2 people, you know, about to fight or something, then that person is coming along to, you know, just like you said, de-escalate, and to make sure that the one that is the perpetrator of any type of crime, whatever, then yeah, they'll get what they deserve, which is, you know, jail time or before a judge and court of law, but not necessarily in a murder or something like that. So I'm with you, Dirk. I really pray and hope that it does work out for them if they do pass that law, and then therefore we can see a change in our society, and maybe even a change across the board that will be like the domino effect, you know, in our society.
Something that we didn't touch on, I want to touch on a little bit, is with the police. For all other states that are not doing this yet, and they still have a police force in place and everything is still normal, I think there needs to be some things need to be revisited in terms of the selection process of police officers. I don't think everyone deserves a badge and a gun. Like some people just don't need it, right? I feel like there needs to be a better screening process. So if you have any history of criminal background, if you were linked to a some kind of hate group or anything of that nature, to me, it kind of like automatically disqualifies you from being able to be in the police force. I don't know how the process is. I can't speak too much on it because I haven't done my research on how cops are selected. I know they go through some formal training and all that kind of stuff, but I just don't understand the full process in terms of how certain officers are put on the force, and they're given the power to do the things that they do. I think in the case of the George Floyd situation, some of those cops, they were like brand new, and they're already out there, and it doesn't take them long to kind of commit the crime. So I don't want to spend too much time on that, but I think that, as we talk about things that we can improve, restructuring the police department, retraining, and all these different things, there needs to be something that is done to kind of, screen people before they come into the police force. I think the job of police is a difficult one. It's one that requires lots of responsibility, and you're given lots of power. That cannot be given to anybody. That has to be special people that can handle that type of job. So that's kind of what I wanted to say.
Yeah, we just saw those 3 police officers, was it North Carolina, where they were accidentally recorded on the dashboard cam?
Where they said, we're just going to go and slaughter these N-words.
Yeah. They were using the N. I mean, they were just blatant. Like, we talk about hidden and subtle racism. This was like flat out, they wanted a war.
Yes.
And God, these people are on the police force.
Yes.
That's scary stuff. And I do think, and we're going to wrap up here in a minute, but you mentioned the officers that were new, that were there at George, with George Floyd. That's a really challenging one for me, because I know that, when I'm new at a job, and especially when I was young, if my boss is doing something and saying this is the way to do it, and clearly he was a distressed person, but to step up and somebody would probably had to physically shove that guy off of George Floyd for it to happen. Not saying there's no culpability, not saying there should be police officers, but boy, it's, what's the level there? I don't know. That's going to be up to a court to decide, and
Yep.
Really challenging. So do you guys have any final thoughts that we didn't get to before we wrap up today?
Chris?
I'll just say, Jonathan said it already, but we don't want anyone to think that we are against the police. I have a sister that's in law enforcement, and I have about 5 cousins that are in law enforcement, and I've actually had the pleasure of interacting with some police officers. We do like baskets at City to like first responders or whatever, and every year I'll take a basket to maybe 4 or 5 different police municipalities or whatever, just to say thank you for your service. So I just want everybody to know there's no malice against them. My purpose is to bring focus on the fact that there's some things that are going on that shouldn't be going on, and those that are in power, I hope they hear our cry, and I hope that they make some changes so that everyone is treated with the same consideration and compassion, because we all deserve it. We're all American citizens. And as far as the removal of the statues and everything like that goes, I think there's a place for everything. And I think that I really think that we're on the precipice of seeing some great things happen in America.
I think that, just to kind of end what I have to say, we have to start looking at everyone from a human being perspective. I think that race is tightly knitted into our history, and it always has been, where we look at people for who they are and what we can see. Black guy, white guy, Chinese guy, Mexican guy. I mean, I understand we all have different cultural values, and we're all have different ethnicities and things of that nature, but we have to look at everything from a human standpoint. We're all humans, none of us have magic like wings, none of us can fly and do have special powers. I mean, we're there's no reason to be racist. There's no reason for bigotry. There's no reason to look at your brother, who's either a man or a woman or whatever you classify yourself as, and have this mentality that you're superior or they're they're beyond you or they're just beneath you is what I want to say. We have to start looking at things from a human aspect and seeing that for what it is. If we do that, then every time we come across these situations, we'll remove the fact that someone has a uniform on and a badge. We'll remove the fact that a black guy might have dreads and those stereotypes will be dismissed. And we got to remove all of this and just look at each person for who they are. And that is a human being. And I would kind of top it off to say, not all police are bad, right? Not all police are good. Not every black person that has dreads, braids, and tattoos is a horrible person. Some might be, some might not be. But you can't look at people at face value for what you see and just automatically have these built-in stereotypes to say they're horrible. Police are not horrible. Black guys are not horrible. White guys are not horrible. It depends on the actual person. And again, we have to just look at people from a human value instead of grouping all people into one category and saying they're horrible. I've seen some pretty negative comments on social media, not my personal page, but things that people have been sharing where people will condemn a whole race and say, oh, all black people are animals. What? I'm not an animal. I'm a good person. I have no criminal record. I have a family. I'm loving. I care about everyone. I'm not racist. I don't care if you're black, white, whatever. How are you going to loop everyone into a box and call them animals and pigs and they're horrible people? So I think that's the route we need to go with it. And I appreciate you, Dirk, for having us on the podcast and talking about all these different things. It was a good topics and good conversation. Again, like Chris said, we're not against police or anything like that. I have people in my family that are police officers that are great. I just think that change needs to happen. And this whole system that has been slated one way to benefit, a certain group of people, we need to even the playing field to make things better in the long run.
Right.
Can I just say one last thing, Dirk? And I'm sorry. Just like Jonathan said, I do want to thank you for having me. It's my third time. Jonathan tried to catch up. He likes me better. Just kidding. But I want to end it with saying, if you're not black and you engage in a conversation with somebody who is, and they tell you about their experiences, please listen and let your defenses go down. And if the person is talking to you about their experiences and how the system they live in or the country they live in or the things that they have witnessed in regards to racism and injustice, please listen to them and try to understand. And that way we can start walking into the direction of healing our entire country.
Yeah, and I would add on to that, Chris, and just say the three of us are basically, we have the same jobs. We work for banking institutions. We're basically on the same levels at our work. Mm-hmm. We do basically the same things. We have very similar family structures. I don't know where John lives. Chris and I live in the same kind of community. He lives in Wentzville. I live in
Jonathan lives like 5 minutes away from me.
Okay, so there we are middle class suburbanite Americans.
Yep.
The only thing that is different about us is our skin color, and that shouldn't be. How do we get to the point where we don't see that as a difference anymore? And I guess we'll continue that discussion later, because this is a never-ending discussion, which is a good thing, because as you mentioned, John, it's built into our culture. It's built into our DNA. Early people started out early on in tribes, and you protected your tribe from the tribe 5 miles over, and you made sure you had food for your tribe's basically your family, mm-hmm. and you probably looked different. And you knew that if you had the Shannons and the Pointers and the Robinsons, mm-hmm. You knew who you were, and it's been built into us for thousands of years, right? Mm-hmm. So how do we break that down within ourselves and get to a better place where we aren't? I've heard it mentioned. Let's get to a place where I interview you, and I'm not interviewing you to fulfill a quota, and you're not looking for a job and expecting, there's just all that just gone.
Yep.
But we're talking about generational change. It'll probably be another couple generations, but we're certainly making leaps forward right now. And we'll continue to have this discussion. Again, if you have listened to this and you have an opposing viewpoint and you've made it this far, I would love to have you on here to participate in this discussion next time. We're going to be circling up. Don't know the time frame, but sometime soon. Come on in. Let's have a talk and get it out and talk to each other as human beings. So thank you, Chris. Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dirk.
We will be talking shortly.
Absolutely.